Alright folks, ready to play some more Witness. So, for this chapter, right after the intro area, probably the first dedicated zone or chapter of the game that players encounter in the Witness, is the Symmetry area. I actually went to Symmetry area before the Apple Orchard. I put the Apple Orchard in with my introduction because I do believe that it's a tutorial meant to go with the other parts of the game, but it's a more optional tutorial than these syntactical demonstrations, the black and white tiles and the hexagons. But over here is the Symmetry area, which is so dear to my heart, as are many places in the Witness, but the Symmetry area is really special because it demonstrates a lot of things. It's so beautiful, and it's so many ideas of the game so well. It's quite easy. I once heard Jonathan Blow refer to this whole half of the island, easy side of the island, which I think is true. But the easiness, I think it's a source of greatness for the game. It's good that it's easy because that helps to be communicated very clearly. So here we are in this amazingly this like rocky, beautiful, and yet abstract. Like, look at the triangles on those rocks. You know, the kind of individual polygons visible in the Witness art style is really a unique, nice thing about the game. Of course, this is our first example, as we'll see so many times throughout the game, of the really quick biome changes. Like, here we are in this lush agricultural zone, and then suddenly it's like New Mexico or something. A lot of games are like that, so I don't think that has too much significance to say about the Witness, except that the Witness, it wants to be a game that has a lot of breadth. It wants to be about a wide variety of things, and it wants to have a high dynamic range, so there can be large differences between areas, huge different ideas as different as we were talking about in previous episode, like the seemingly incompatible view of existence and of consciousness, the scientific third-person perspective versus the internal kind of mystical perspective. The Witness wants to have the ability to talk about huge differences and also small distinctions, and tiny subtleties, like the difference between a solution that almost works and one that just barely does work. So here we are. We're in the Symmetry area, and we encounter our first little puzzle, which has 2 starts and 2 ends. So far, nothing's unusual. We've seen this before. But of course, when we click, we get 2 lines, which is pretty crazy. In 2 lines, we open up into this beautiful little hallway with these little vases, and we're in this very modern-looking studio. It's actually an art studio of a kind. It's a glass-making studio. We've got piles of sand, this kind of trays, this wonderful kiln here, and things are being fired. We've got some like drooping glass. It's a wonderful place, and of course it also heavily embodies this idea of symmetry, which is so powerfully declared with this first puzzle. In this first room, we've got symmetry of the vases. The vases themselves, there's a lot of like conspiracy theories. There were once a bunch of theories online about like, oh, what do these vases do? But do they have some secret meaning? They have a slight secret meaning, but it's not as big of a deal as people once suspected. Of course, the vases are symmetrical. They also to the puzzle, so you can see how my chosen vase here lines up to the outline that I selected, and if I go for a different design, like we can make the purple one pop out and pop. If we go like that. There we go. So they're symmetrical. They're also they're in a special sequence, a sequence that's actually binary counting. So this is a 0, this is a 1, this is a 1, 0, 2 in binary, and there's 3 in binary, and then we go over here to 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's pretty interesting. We can, let's see, where are we getting power from? This looks like it's still Where's the next powered panel? Ah, here we go. A little bit more into the studio, these bags of sand. I can't pass this up, being such a Braid fanatic. This is the game's most obvious Braid reference. The dissolving sandcastle is part of the logo of Braid. It shows up as broken hourglass with a sandcastle kind of falling out of it in this magical, impossible way. You might think, well, it's just here because, you know, he made his previous game, and here's a pile of sand, and there's nothing more to it. There's not piles of sand elsewhere in the game, so, you know, of course, you'd put it here. I think there's a little bit more to it than that. Braid is intimately connected with the idea of symmetry, but symmetry in time rather than in space. The famous twist ending of Braid is built on an event that certain, you know, characters say certain things and jump to places and move around, and then it has a very different emotional meaning when going forward versus rewinding. It still tells a coherent story, and of course the whole idea of rewinding time brings up this symmetry and the mystery of why the equations of physics behave symmetrically. That is, you can turn the time values negative and the equations still play out and give you coherent results. So I think Braid, it's appropriate to reference Braid in the symmetry area. Yeah. So, but I'm always happy to see it there. Complete this. Go here. Now we'll see an interesting complication here, which is that we aren't allowed to continue, even though my cursor on the left is free. Over on the right, we're blocked by this break in the path, and both lines have to complete in order for it to be valid. So we're going to have to find a way of making it through with both lines intact. Interesting constraint that wasn't there in previous puzzles. So this introduces sort of an interesting skill of checking back and forth between the two lines. And of course it produces results that are rather more beautiful than the usual puzzles in the way this. There we go. Oh, so complicated. See, now this is interesting. One thing that I realized I neglected to mention earlier is the earlier puzzle as we were exiting the castle gate was the first time that we were taught that we can't click through an object we can't click through to if part of a panel is just physically blocked, then we can't go there. So this is showing us that we could choose our entrance. I might think, oh, this is not very good, but then I can choose this one over here. Let's see which one is fruitful. This looks like it should work out for us. This is also interesting because we see that in this column here, it's totally unblocked. So this almost removes, here we're dealing with constraints on both sides, but in this section, we take a break from that. It's just the lines are racing upward in their own little columns, and we can actually totally ignore this sort of second fourth of the image and this final fourth of the image, because those lines will be completely unencumbered. So we only have to pay attention to the first and third fourths, but of course we aren't allowed to click those. So we just put our cursor in the one, and then look completely at the other as we're able to solve it. But then it's funny because of course it's reversed, so you have to make all the controller commands reversed as you're watching the other one. Then there's something kind of funny that happens here. What's the reward for all of your hard effort? It's like nothing. It's a freaking ocean. The game is like, you know, you thought you were gonna get some special vault for this. No, you just get this. You get this ocean, which some players have interpreted this as just like a joke, like they're just trolling the player. But I think it's something more. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm just blinded by my love for the game, but The Witness is a beautiful game, and this is the first time, if you're like me and you're coming from the Symmetry area, this is the first time that you've really seen the fact that you're on an island. I mean, you get that little view of the bay, but the castle otherwise has these tall walls that block your view of the shore, and you don't really see it out in the fields because there's this weird hedge of trees that's deliberately put there to block you from seeing it. And then this, for many players, is going to be the first time, and they see it all at once. This huge field of view, which would be 180 degrees, except that no television screen really takes up 180 degrees of your vision, and the game's field of view is probably only set to like 80 degrees or 90 degrees. But this big, wide open field of sea and sky, which now that I think about it, is highly symmetric. Obviously, there's just this little line on the horizon. And there's these funny objects floating there, very symmetrical. So it's kind of a striking vision, whether or not it's trolling the player or whether it's meant to be a sort of a calming, like sudden manifestation of this wide open vista is left for the reader to decide, I guess. But for now, now that we've powered this, we can follow this line back here. And now is a good time to note that this whole thing, this whole building, artist glassmaking studio, is built on Symmetry. Of course, we have this little room over here, and then over in the diagonal side, we have another little room. Even the little details of the room, like this I don't know, ice box, and this little bunch of trays are duplicated on this side, where we have an ice box and a bunch of wooden trays, but trays nonetheless. Over here we've got like stacked up random instruments, and that one didn't work as well. But you see what I mean. There is a kind of symmetry going on with this nice kiln in the middle. Oh, and of course the wires here snake across. This comes around, and then there's another wire that comes out the other side and snakes around the other way. So, a lot of radial symmetry happening. And up, here we go, in this room full of radial symmetry. So that's another interesting thing. The puzzle here is bilateral symmetry, and then in this room full of bilateral symmetry. And then the puzzle in there, all the puzzles in there are also bilateral symmetry, and here we can see we have like the things hung up, the bags, the sand, all piled up in a bilaterally symmetrical way. But then in this radial symmetrical room, of course, we get radial symmetry, which is a lot more fun. Learn some of the ways that we can interact. We might learn that the lines, of course, that's difficult to get at. There we go. We might learn here that the lines, you kind of can't touch the center square because there's, and both cursors end up there, and there's no way out. So that's an important new rule of the symmetry area. This is a cute little mini sequence coming up right here. If I can figure out how to get through. One of the interesting things about radial symmetry is with bilateral symmetry, it's the lines could never cross in the middle for that same reason that right now they can't cross in the center. But they couldn't cross at any point in the middle. And so you knew that the start point on the left side was going to go to the end point on the left side, and the start point on the right side was going to go to the end point on the right side. But with radial symmetry, you're not sure if you're supposed to go clockwise or counterclockwise. And so there's this ambiguity when you have two starts and two exits of what are you really going to do? Are you going to go for the one exit or the other? Let's see. You kind of, it's quite difficult in a funny way to be watching both lines at once, so it's kind of a feeling of poking around and exploring. now we have this funny warped aspect here, because the glass is put out a little too put out to dry a little too soon. Here we have another interesting example where one side of the puzzle is completely free, and the other side has all of the interesting breaks that constrain us. And now we get to this one, which is pretty hilarious, which is so warped that like there's these like nasty triangles down here. The line is like very badly distorted. But of course the warpedness of the actual glass, ugly and jarring as it is, doesn't disrupt the mathematical symmetry of what's happening. Although it does make it difficult to draw. So I thought that was a really funny solution. And of course what's super funny is that these are all the same image being drawn over and over. It's not the same over there. But these three, same exact solution, but because of that kind of slow, pokey, explory way that you have to go through, and the different breaks, ordinarily in the Witness, if you have three puzzles with the exact same solution, it's usually quite obvious when you're looking at the second puzzle that the solution is the same. But with the symmetry puzzles, you can put the obstacles, for instance, here the obstacles are evenly distributed on both sides of the puzzles. Here the obstacles are only on the left side. This might actually be the exact same. Yeah, this is the exact same puzzle. It's just so badly warped that you don't notice that you just drew that same exact puzzle. So that's pretty funny to have a symmetry theme and just be literally repeating it. But the thing that's new is that you have this distracting warping of the image, which is supposed to make you feel like something is not symmetric, but the mathematical symmetry of the structure of the panel is intact, which is nice. Alright, so with that, we're out of this building, and we're on to this new area. So it's interesting to note the color here is this nice green color. Just keep that in mind, because green, unlike so many of the other colors in the Witness, which I believe to be arbitrary, I would say this particular shade of green, because of its association with symmetry and with sort of the unification of opposites, is quite important for the game. So one of the things that's so nice about the symmetry area, it's so visual. I mean, look at all this. It's just, the peninsula is so beautiful. The reflection in the water is excellent. Most video games don't do normal reflections. Nowadays we're starting to get these ray tracing solutions in games like Battlefield 5, but normally when you see a reflection in video games, it's one of two technologies. It's either they're using this thing called cube maps, or they're using screen space reflections, and both of those look good sometimes, but are actually optically wrong. Like, they will not give you the correct result. They won't show you things that are hidden off screen. In the case of screen space, we get these wacky results sometimes when things close to the camera, like the gun your character is holding, is like reflected in this gigantic lake as if it was like a mile away. For the Witness, to get these perfect optically correct reflections, they do what they did in old school video games in like the 1990s when they needed to create a reflection. They just copy pasted the entire model of the island in slightly lower resolution, but the whole thing is just copy pasted upside down. So that is there's a real model, like all the polygons are right there underground, just with a slightly kind of watery texture going on over them. So we're up here. You can't help but notice this is a slight digression, but this incredible monolith, right? What is it doing? I mean, it looks like the monolith of 2001: Space Odyssey, which interesting connotation there. So the 2001: Space Odyssey monolith was this sort of alien structure that came to visit the early humans and had something to do with the first ideas of consciousness and the first tool use, but really the awakening of mankind, the distinction between animal and man. And they're not so significant in this game, as we see later. It's sort of just signpost of progress in the game, but I think the comparison is intentional. That to have them be kind of associated with the first stirrings of consciousness and subjective awareness. So here we run into another new concept in the witness. Nothing in this area has taught us about hexagons. We only learned about hexagons back in the tutorial area. So this is not going to let us in unless we have to know about symmetry, of course, or do we actually? This is a non-symmetrical puzzle. But we have to have powered this with this little power line. So we have to have completed this glass house, but it's also introducing an important thing in the witness, which I suppose we saw earlier in the vault. The idea that certain areas are going to be gated, and they're not gated by the strict requirement that you have to have a key or something, but just by the lack of knowledge. You know, if you don't know how to solve the puzzle, then you can't get through. So just to gotta make sure that the players are on the same page when they come into a new area. So this, I just love this gate. I guess it resembles the Japanese Shinto gates, but not super strongly. I mean, there aren't that many Japanese Shinto gates made out of sandstone, so that's the main difference. I don't know, the red is just such a striking color design. A lot of the areas of the witness have really strong color contrast. We come in here. There's another gate, but it's all blocked off. So we see we're gated. We're gonna have to do something about that. Let's head down this path. And we see these, maybe these hoses are kind of ugly. Some people seem to describe them as kind of a nuisance around the island. I guess I got so used to seeing them that I'm just like, yes, progress, let me follow this, but it is a little bit bizarre to have this beautiful island strung up with odd wires everywhere. So here we see what the these glass panels were all being used for. We have these transparent panels in this area, which, as we'll see, seem to serve no real purpose. We got some more bilateral symmetry here. But this time, it's bilateral symmetry collecting hexagons. So instead of just avoiding breaks, with the breaks, you literally could not complete the puzzle unless you had managed to avoid all the breaks. But now, it's possible to actually fail, because you just didn't realize that you didn't pick up a hexagon. And of course, with the breaks, it's easy to you've either succeeded in getting past a break or you haven't. But with these hexagons, it's a little trickier. What's happening? What is happening? Here we go. All these designs look so pretty. With the hexagons, you can kind of pick them up in any order, which adds a lot of complication to the game compared to just trying to get the lines through the breaks at any cost. Here we realize so this is a bit of a trick, after the previous puzzles have all had a starting at the beginning and going to the side, then we introduce one with radial symmetry, and we might assume that we're heading across, and that way these previous ones all stuck, the top start headed to the top exit. But now for this, I think we're going to be, rather than trying to race across over here, although I suppose we could do that, but maybe we have a choice. We could either go across like that, or we could go and complete the puzzle like this. So let's see if this panel will commit to that ambiguity. We'll continue with it, or go the other way. So this is an interesting one. Now all the hexagons, just like the previous puzzles where all the breaks were on the one side, now all the hexagons are on the one side, except there's one issue. This hexagon down there is a little low. I'm going to have to loop in like that, and that might cause me some problems, or maybe not. No, looks like maybe not. But let's see, could we solve that another way? So as we come out the other side, yeah, maybe it can be done. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so in both of these, either solution is possible, which is interesting. Maybe that's fitting with the idea of symmetry. And then we have this a blue line, interestingly, not the green line over there. Subtle color difference, but it'll be important. Blue. Going through these wonderful trees. Nice thing about these trees, their roots are always exposed, and the reason for that, of course, is that this is the symmetry area, and the game is reminding us that trees, although we see them as above ground, are, in a sense, symmetrical. So this kind of ties this into the apple orchard drawing in continuing the interest in the shape of the trees and their branching structure. Also, of course, we get the wonderful reflections of the trees upside down in the water. So we're going to continue this around here, although, yeah. We'll just follow the path from here. Here we've got some yellow dots, and we've got two different colored lines, where previously we only had one. Two different colored lines, two different colored hexagons. It's going to be pretty clear what the rule is here. You've got to pick up the right colored hexagons. So now you have specific hexagons. Unlike in those previous puzzles where, as I demonstrated, there was an ambiguity, and some of the hexagons could be picked up by either line. So we're going to run through and grab some hexagons. Interesting choice here to offer this superfluous ending. I think that's again just contributing to the ideas of symmetry. And then we see the neutral black hexes, which can be picked up by either line. And this is interesting, so we're going to dive in, and it's not going to work. It's certainly pleasing to see the transparent backgrounds, but that won't start to contribute until later. Although I do like that, of course, because they're even with the background, and we have such a view of the ocean, we have the sea and skyline cutting all these panels beautifully in half. And now, what's this? Okay, so we have a blue line in here. We obtain these wonderful yellow lines. And then we've got a mixed tube. I don't think this shows up anywhere else in the game. I don't think so. And we have this mixed power line carrying both blue and yellow symmetry energy to this next panel. Again, I'll comment on that later, but notice the contrast with the green is interesting. Because, of course, yellow and blue mixed together make green. So here we are, and well, we'll go through the puzzles first, but this is one of my... The symmetry area is one of my favorite areas. This is one of my favorite areas in in the whole game, one of my favorite subsections. So we're just going through, we're solving some stuff. There we go. How are we gonna do this? Do that first. Nope. There we go. Okay, now we're safe. Something funny going on with our yellow line. If you play the witness, you probably remember what's going on. So here we have a dominant number of hexagons on one side and less on the other. Quite difficult to decide what end should be the proper end. But, see, now I've walled it off. What am I doing? So I definitely can't wall off that ending, so I'll have to scoop around this way. Right. Okay, yeah, what was I doing earlier? I'm sorry, that must have been very frustrating to watch if you got this selection ahead of me. But we see our yellow line here, just as it gives us, throwing us these simple little puzzles. Now we got a choice of starting locations, but the yellow line is fading away. And now, of course, it's gonna give us one more. It's barely there. Maybe now? Yeah, totally gone. So now, it's our job. Now, the yellow line is still there, as shown by the fact that I can't continue through this center point. But it's our job to now gather this up. I'm sure a very rookie mistake is to just go like this, but of course it's radially symmetric, and so this point for the yellow line is going to be down here, which means we have to sweep through this point as well with the blue line in order to capture the hexagon. So that's a nice bit of thought. And it's interesting that the game tries so much to give us this gentle introduction, but it's not until the yellow line is actually completely taken away. It gives us this warning, like, it's still there, it's still there. That's just to clue us in to the fact that, yeah, the line still exists. But in terms of the thought process, that shifts all at once. It's not really a gradual transition. All of a sudden you hit here, you realize, oh, wait, I've got to start visualizing this when it's radially symmetric path. Okay, so here we go. We're going to come way out here in order to grab the, yellow stone. Hexagon. There we go. And now everything of interest is one of the yellow stones. Let's see, is this correct? Yes. Okay. Now, why would that be one of my favorite areas of the game? Well, it's something that I couldn't talk about while I was doing the puzzles, so I was concentrating on doing them. But there's, the puzzles themselves are a little bit unremarkable. The turning invisible thing is a bit gimmicky. These three feel a bit like filler. But there's some stuff around this that was just amazing, and also I have a personal affinity for this area, which is quite something. A little audio log here. Let's give it a listen. Oh, but first let me remember to turn on subtitles. Let's see. Yeah. One of my favorite audio logs in the game.
Formerly, you appeared to me, O Lord, as invisible by every creature because you are a hidden, infinite God. Infinity, however, is incomprehensible by every means of comprehending. Later, you appeared to me as visible by all. For a thing exists only as you see it, and it would not actually exist unless it saw you. For your vision confers being, since your vision is your essence. Thus, my God, you are equally invisible and visible. As you are invisible, as the creature is, which exists only insofar as the creature sees you, you are visible. You, therefore, my invisible God, are seen by all, and in all sight you are seen by everyone who sees. You who are invisible, who are both absolute from everything visible and infinitely super exalted, are seen in every visible thing and in every act of vision. Therefore, I must leap across this wall of invisible vision to where you are to be found. But this wall is both everything and nothing. For you, who confront as if you were both all things and nothing at all, dwell inside that high wall which no natural ability can scale by its own power. Nicolas of Cusa, 1453.
Okay, so whether this is your first time hearing it, or your second time, or even your 10th time, you could be forgiven for thinking, like the players on the dock over there, who had all their hard work rewarded by just a blank view of the open sky, that this is some kind of crazy troll move. I mean, the quote, like, invisible, visible, visible, invisible, all things that are seen by all have your being conferred by seeing. It seems it's kind of a crazy quote to put here. It's super, certainly, you know, when I walk up here, this is one of the earliest audio logs in the game that is, like, visible, that isn't hidden away, when this is, like, glowing with its bright green color. Is quite evident in a way that the other audio logs are hidden away in little corners. So it's prominently placed. It's clearly tied to this section, so it's kind of making a pun, because this, of course, this yellow line is literally turning invisible. But there is actually a point here, and I want to talk about what Cusa is talking about. So he says first God appeared as invisible because he's God. You know, he's hidden, he's far away. Maybe he lives in the sky somewhere, or in heaven, or in some other realm or dimension that we can't even touch. And invisible because he's a hidden infinite God. He's infinity. How could we even touch infinity? It's incomprehensible. There's no way of getting from here to there. And that impossibility is the same impossibility, or a similar impossibility, as the infinite, unscalable gap between the concrete scientific world and the kind of intersubjective world. Or maybe it's not the same possibility, that's a big philosophical jump, but it's the same quality of two completely separate worlds. How do I go from this world of the finite, of people, things, objects, separateness, to this infinite world of God? But then later Cusa has a change of heart. He says, later on in my life, you seemed visible everywhere, because things only exist as you see them. Things wouldn't exist unless they saw you, in a way. And Cusa's saying, well, now I see, it's not like I'm looking for God, like, where's he, where'd he go? But every act of vision, by the fact that I can see this subjective experience, this consciousness, this vividness to my inner life, is God, and is the presence of God, and so it's everywhere. So that's what he means when he says, you, my invisible God, are seen by all, and in all sight you are seen by everyone who sees. That there's nowhere you can find it, but that's because in every moment, in every act of vision, that conscious awareness is already there, that sort of divine soul that Cusa would have believed in. That's very interesting. So he refers to this boundary right, between, which is the boundary, he says, between him and God, between these two worlds, is both everything and nothing, which it really is. I don't know. Cusa describes it as the wall of paradise, this infinitely high wall, and God, he says, dwells inside that high wall, which no natural ability can scale by its own power. So I think that's a very good, interesting quote if you can untangle all the visibles and invisibles, and goes right to the heart of some of the themes of the Witness, and brings a new perspective to it. This Nicolas of Cusa, writing 500 plus years ago, and yet he's writing about something real, even though he's talking about gods and creatures and things like that. He's talking about something that is a genuine mystery that we are no closer to solving today, or only fractionally closer than we were. The wall seems just as high, just as impossible to scale. The difference between these two worlds of the things that are seen and the act of seeing, which, as much as we can explain about the eye, about about the mind and information processing, seems like that the redness of red, those kind of basic aspects of experience remain beyond our grasp in a very Cusa-esque, impossible way. So that's one reason why I like this, is that just the newness of these ideas, and yet the hilarity of packaging them in this total mindfuck quote, is something that is really original to the Witness. But then there's something else to this, which is, just as Cusa is talking about God hiding in plain sight, about this awareness that is that's in every act of vision, you're here, you're doing these puzzles, you're focused on this pane of glass, but it's not even a real pane of glass. I mean, in real life, you're just looking at your television, everything is in focus. Like, there's no blur on distant objects when you focus on the panels, which would have been an interesting design decision. They could have done that. Like, when you zoomed in, then they could have focused on wherever the cursor was pointing. But they deliberately chose not to do that. And so you're going through these panels, which are transparent, and again, there's been no reason for the transparency so far. It just gives you a nice view of the ocean. And this is, like, kind of rubbing in your face, and yet many people will not notice this, and many more will start and will only notice it, later on or partway through the puzzles, that, like, look, what is this? Like, this thing is the exact design that all of these little lines are made of. Like, what the hell is that doing there, right? This is the little kiln over there. We were just over there. We did the puzzles on the one side that were so warped. And it's like, not only is it just a circle, but it goes up. This chimney has this totally implausible, I mean, it looks like the thing. So I had this realization when I was here for the first time. And I immediately realized now there's a bit of a gap in it. It's kind of funny. It's like it's almost complete, but then right here there's a gap. Fortunately, after seeing this, you can head right down, and well, I'm sure. Head down or head up? Okay, yeah, we'll head up and complete this little cycle, which is also where this rope is telling us. It's saying, okay, we can go up here. But so we can go up here, and let me just note one other thing, which is the beauty of this path that totally exists over here and makes this a symmetrical loop. But it's calmly hidden by these bushes. The Witness is constantly doing this. It's drawing your eye away, just like we were talking about over there, putting things in plain sight or totally accessible, but just so masterfully controlling your attention that it builds the entire game around this flow, knowing that nobody's going to go this way, even though you can, and it's not like it's hidden behind some invisible wall or something, like it's right there. But anyway, so the Witness, a bit of a master at that stuff. Interestingly, you can't get this to quite line up until you can get through this gate, so you have to have completed this. And that sequence of invisible puzzles, in particular, that sequence tied to that Cusa quote, then we do get through. Okay, come out there. Oh, let's get a little decorative. I don't know. Yeah, that's nice. Here we are, and we have this nice little perch. And from here, ends up. And wouldn't it be funny if you could just... So that was the first time that I encountered what some people call environmental puzzles, or projection puzzles in the Witness. And as you can see from this monolith, if there's one, there's at least these two others. This being the Symmetry area, the resolution here is pretty clear to what that other one might be. And it's pretty stunning. It's just its reflection in the water. Now, to really complete the idea of symmetry, this is one of the things that I really like about this in particular. The gap, both of these are blocked from this area, even though this is the area where the game wants you to see it. But the game doesn't want you to complete it from here. You can go down here, so we can, and it's just so interesting how this is all laid out. I mean, first of all, this is just an absolutely fascinating moment. I'm not giving enough time to that. I mean, this is one of the most amazing things to happen in any video game. It's they built the whole game around the moment of initial realization, which could happen anywhere because there are a lot of these throughout the game. And from now on, we're going no spoilers. We're going to be talking about these. You're going to be talking about the theater videos. You're going to be talking about like endgame stuff. So if you saw that and you thought that was amazing and you totally missed out earlier, then stop watching these videos now because I'm going to start talking about everything. So one of the things that is, I mean, we'll have plenty of time to talk about these environmental puzzles later, but this is the duality that the Witness is talking about between what's going on in the panels and what's going on in the worlds, is the duality between this, the environmental puzzles. They're so immediate. You see them. Sometimes there's a slight aspect of puzzle solving, like here, lining them up to get around the gap. There's often a slight aspect of puzzle solving. But it's not like the panels. They're not declared explicitly, of course. They're just in the world. And the main difficulty is in just recognizing them, even though they've been in front of you literally this entire time. You've been staring at this. You know, if you're a first-time player struggling with this, you've been staring at this for, you know, maybe 20 minutes or something, like getting all of these hexagons lined up because you're new to this. And yet it's so easy to miss out on this, or to, you know, to avoid seeing any of the other super obvious environmental projection paths that are out there in the world. This is it's trying to provide that experience that Cusa's talking about of the immediacy of vision and the vividness of it. Here, you know, these can kind of be solved by a robot. The fact that you're seeing them in this beautiful 3D world and they have this like wonderful bright color to them is irrelevant to their syntactical rules that govern the solution of the puzzle. So the Witness is, it's about the actual existing dichotomy between the game mechanics, and it's also about the larger and deeper dichotomy of the ideas that are symbolized by the game mechanics. But for now, we're going to do what I did when I discovered this and breathlessly rush down to this lower ground floor so that we might complete the bottom one. Oh yeah, now we gotta line it up just right. You'll note that that is only underwater. You don't see those little glittering gems up here. So it's little bit of magic, and that little bit of magic is important. I mean, obviously, you know, tracing a path with your mind and seeing sparks fly through the air is magic, but especially the little underwater thing is very interesting, in that it's sort of confirming, like, in what world are these two separate objects, right? I mean, in the video game world, they're two separate objects because, like I described, all this stuff was copy-pasted upside down. But in the real world, this reflection is not a separate physical object, but it is a separate visual image. It's a separate mental object. And so, by emphasizing that these two things are different environmental puzzles and not just a duplication of the same one, it's emphasizing the importance of the first-person experience of the observer. It's saying this isn't some hidden thing in the world. It's a hidden image that's presented to your eyes. That's what we're looking for. So now that we're down here, and it's interesting also that these two projection paths, they both lead you to two different places. This lower one requires you to be down here, where we see this other puzzle panel. Like, what is that doing here? It's got this whole other wire system, despite the fact that if we race up to the top, we can follow this wire system right up there to that door we unlocked. In order to get the top panel, we're up here, and we've already unlocked this final area. And this final area, you know, maybe we'll go through that right now. Maybe not. So this final area can be completed with just the hexagons. But yeah, maybe we'll do it right now. It won't be so bad. So here we go. We've got yellow hexagons. That means we can use the yellow. That's funny. Okay, so we got yellow hexagons. We're going to trace this through. Yeah, that seems nice. And then there's a funny kind of symmetry here. The previous ones were all glass, and you could see both sides. And of course, they had two lines on them. All of a sudden, we only have one line. But there's these connecting little cables here to this other puzzle over here. And again, I'm not going to pretend to not know the mechanics, but the solution is you have to duplicate this pattern in a facing way, as if this puzzle was looking in the mirror and seeing itself reflected, which is yet another form of symmetry that hasn't appeared before. And it's interesting because it's an unenforced form of symmetry. You, the player, are now responsible for sort of being the guardian of the symmetry. In fact, I gotta look back and forth a couple times to make sure that I'm doing everything right. Okay. So it's an interesting, just like with the little apple tutorial and the missing apple throwing a curveball at the last second. It's that last second curveball in the ending area that's showing that everything's always going to be fresh. There's always going to be new ideas coming. How am I going to do this? I'm going to have to go around here in order to get that one. Then we're going to just... Oh, that's such a beautiful pattern. I thought it was going to be so ugly, but look at that. Okay, that'll be easy to remember, hopefully. Yeah. This puzzle shows up actually on the cover of the, not the cover of the game, but the icon of the game, the little desktop shortcut or iOS app icon. So perhaps it's this one. No, I think it's this one. It shows up with a couple hexagons, and I don't know. It's a special puzzle. Joe Blow must have had some special fondness for it. To put it there. Although it shows up with the background of that orange forest, which is obviously incongruous. Okay, what are we going to do here? This is just like that proof earlier. All of these are impossible because you have to make a swiping L shape. If you come out from the center, then you sacrifice your ability to get one of the two hexagons. Same with this guy. So this is our only choice. We go like that, and then these well-positioned hexagons just totally spoil it for us and tell us what the answer is. This nice little heart wave beat. Okay. And we're starting, of course, from the one opposite the exit. I screwed it up. What happened? We're gonna do this right. Okay. Out and down, and up and out. What am I doing? Oh, how tricky. The last minute curveball gets me again. Okay, all of these have been this strict, like I described, kind of mirror symmetry. But this one now, the exit is flipped. This exit is on the bottom instead of on the top. Very subtle difference. And so we realize that this final one is not mirror symmetry. So instead, we've got to do the mirror symmetry but flip it upwards. So we're going to come out and go up instead of coming out and going down. Go Alright, so here we go. Up. And then this is going to work just perfectly. Now we've got this funny looking box. Little golden cube, like a little lantern. Or, as my wife calls it, a piece of cheese, which I find a little bit disparaging. Lanterns are golden boxes. It's getting a lot of height. It's beautiful, slow animation. They're taking its time. These are directly to the mountain, across the entire map. So this is probably, for most players, the first area they come across, both because, certainly likely to be the first area they complete, because it's so easy. In addition to being right there next to the tutorial area, it's a lot harder to get stuck on than the other areas. So with this beautiful little golden box, this sets up the structure of the whole rest of the game. There's going to be other areas. In fact, you can maybe see a little golden box over those rocks over there. And you'll be able to occasionally spot them. Sometimes they're hidden away throughout the rest of the game world. And it becomes clear that you need these boxes. The boxes are going to light up the lasers. The lasers are all going to go to the mountain. Somehow, powering up the mountain is going to be a beneficial thing to do for the player. So this first area, in a way, it's its own chapter, but it's also kind of a tutorial area, being the kind of one of the most straightforward and one of the most charismatic and just characteristic, and a declaration of what the witness is about. So this just like the pink trees leading to that the drawings that we later see in the end game. This functions as an introduction to the whole structure of the witness. Although any of these areas would do the introduction just as well. So there we can see the structure of our game, and we can see this wonderful back and forth symmetry that we got this final area. But I'm going to return to something I was describing earlier, which is how this amazing environmental puzzle is only viewable from this area, and this area is this privileged, special place, right? If you're first playing the Witness, you got through 2 fancy doors to get up here. You get up here to this beautiful place with these like carved stone steps. This is like a secret zone, or a forbidden or a highly privileged and honored zone. And you got here by solving these puzzles, which again, remember, there's nothing on. These are the types of puzzles where you have all the information that you need in order to succeed, right, on the panel. In contrast to the apple tree puzzles, where there's information from the world. Then over here, I guess you could argue that these sort of depend on they're a little bit blurring that boundary, because they rely on this odd kind of back and forth mirror symmetry, which is in the world. But this area is fundamentally, it's about you're achieving progress in the game. You're solving more puzzles. You're getting these lasers. You're gonna unlock something at the mountain. It's very mandatory that the line that you've been following since all the way back there has continued uninterrupted. The string of power to this door, which is then leading up to the laser, which is then bouncing over there. And then we remember the previous, the other reflection of the environmental puzzle. And I think that the fact that it's a reflection is significant, maybe. It's the more ephemeral, the less real of the two. And that leads us to this little puzzle right here, which looks the same, but is quite different from what's going on above. So we're going to go through that now. You'll see, from any other perspective, it doesn't seem to make much sense. It's easily completable, and yet it fails you. But when the camera locks you in, you see that it conspicuously lines up with these rock formations in a way that's just all too tempting to trace. And there you go. So this, still a symmetry puzzle, totally different kind. This is like the apple trees from the tutorial area. This is the kind of puzzle the apple trees are trying to warn us about, man. Dependent on context outside of the panel. More about a visual appearance of the world. Sort of like an intermediate between the syntax panels, which are just like Sudokus, and these kind of immediate visual experience environmental puzzles, right? Because here you have the panel telling you what to do, but it's not exactly clear what to do. Like if you were completing the puzzle from over here, it would not be very obvious at all that this is the correct solution. And yet when you see the correct solution, bam, it's there. It's an immediate visionary experience. So we're going to go through, but then interestingly, the Witness, it's not about, it wants to maintain the tension. It wants to blur the lines. And so here we immediately start getting a little bit of complexity added to this. Here we can trace the first, it's partially obscured by bushes, then obscured by rocks, and we have to rely on our knowledge of symmetry and of the game mechanics and of the fact that rocks sometimes reflect symmetrically to complete the whole line. And I'll follow this around. Another thing worth noting. Okay, the green line. This is the time for my green versus blue and yellow theory to shine. So the lines here, you got both lines. They're both green. Up there you have one blue line and one yellow line. This blue and yellow, they're two different colors. They're distinct. They're kind of opposite colors. That, to me, is representative of duality and division and separateness and categorization. Different kinds of symmetry, radial, bilateral, kind of mirror symmetry, that kind of thing. Versus here, the green color is a mix. It's about it's the unification of these things. It's monistic instead of dualistic, and so the game is sort of saying, okay, there's two types of puzzles here. There's puzzles that are about this direct visual experience, and there's puzzles that are about this kind of more scientific mindset, which is about dividing and categorizing things. Dividing and categorizing versus a kind of holistic, all-at-once perception. So this is kind of another funny one, continuing. There's just a stupid little rock in the middle that like does not line up very well. That's a no-go. But if you properly position these, they form a very convincing pattern. Just always keeping it fresh with a new puzzle. It's a little bit tedious even to describe these because they're these micro moments. But the micro moments is what makes them interesting. And then this is a really great one. Previously, all the rocks have been lined up approximately equally spaced in the water. But now we get rocks that are at different places of the water. So even though each reflection is symmetric, because of the fact now if there was a crouch button, we could go prone in the witness. And if I was prone and my eyes were right on the level of the water, then all of this would appear symmetric. But since I'm standing at some height with respect to the water surface, I see the closer rock as lower down in my field of view than the far rock, which is closer to the horizon. So that creates this kind of disturbed view where I have all this empty sky up above, which is interesting to note, even though it didn't really affect the puzzle much. I mean, yeah. So we'll continue around here. Can we get these beautiful reflections everywhere? Really unique to the witness, since so few games commit to the mirroring the whole world upside down. So more of these modern little pillows and stuff, not just in the garden, not just in the castle. Here, this is a pretty funny one. So we see these rocks over here. Of course, lining up does nothing. And then we're like trying to line up these rocks, like, but they just don't really space well. I guess that's kind of okay. Like if we could get that to work, but it keeps locking me in. So I think like, all right, well maybe the game is to like see this, and then okay, see how that lines up, and then we're gonna just trace it anyways, even though it locks me into this perspective. But no, it doesn't work. So I don't know how long a typical player spends doing this. But of course, the aim is to turn around. Look at these beautiful palm trees, but they're so far away and they're just so different that that it's hard for a typical player or a fresh player to immediately realize this. And of course, you have to sneak around to the other side, which is another symmetry joke. That it's like, well, you could solve the puzzles from either side. Before that, that hasn't been possible because the puzzle's supposed to be on a cliff's edge. But now it's sneaking this. This is the last puzzle of this little secret sequence down here. So this is that final puzzle curveball that I love so much. This is badly aligned with the trees, but I hope you'll forgive me. There we go. Now, a funny thing happens after solving this puzzle, which is nothing. This puzzle isn't connected to another power line. Nothing else goes off. There's no like little secret doors around here or anything. This whole sequence of beautiful ideas is entirely optional. Just like how the apple trees were optional, and optional as a tutorial, more optional than the other ones because they're kind of farther away and you're more likely to get distracted as a player. I myself came down here before doing the apple trees. And just like how these environmental puzzles are so deeply optional that many players never even notice them. So I think it's an interesting statement of the game to have all these puzzles that are not required for completion. And it's also, of course, another instance of symmetry. A lot of the other areas of the game will only have puzzles that are sort of these direct perception puzzles, or puzzles that are these kind of like kind of Sudoku-ish syntax and logic puzzles. But the Symmetry area has both, and it's of course super fitting for it to have both because it's the Symmetry area. So here on this lower level, we have these optional puzzles, this blend of blue and yellow, representing this kind of more unified monistic attitude, and then higher up we have the puzzles that are more about division, more about hierarchy, more about duality, distinctions, little individual rules, and things like that. So I think that's very beautiful about this game. Oh, one thing I almost even forgot to mention: this beautiful siren over here. But maybe it's a partially good thing I forgot to mention. This siren exists for a multitude of reasons, and she's very beautiful. I, of course, as a Braid fanatic, was super excited when I saw this siren, because I thought it was a signal. I thought it was a Braid reference. I was like, oh, this is like the princess. I mean, look, she's like this amazing maiden, but she's got these talons. She's sitting out there. It's like this impossible thing. You can see she's got this orange hair, which especially in the underwater reflection becomes this beautiful, flowing, infinitely long hair. And up here, the reflection is all broken up, which is an interesting artistic way of making the point that was made similarly. We'll just jog over here for a moment. Making a similar kind of mathematical point to this puzzle over here, where the rocks are reflecting based on their nearness to the viewer. Here too, we have a kind of asymmetry in the reflection, based on the fact that we're at a certain height above the ground, and so looking down at the water, we get a different image than looking straight across. But in addition to just making that point, sadly, it's not a Braid reference, as far as I know. And sadly, it doesn't really have too much of a place in The Witness in general. I mean, there are other statues on the island. This was the first one I saw, and maybe it's the first one that a lot of players see. It's kind of nicely hidden in that way. But it, the siren, the image of the siren shows up in one or two other places of The Witness, but to my understanding, it's a bit of a relic of an earlier version of the story, which had to do with a sort of a boat crash, and an earlier version of the story was much more like BioShock or something, and had this explicit narrative, and there were characters, and there was like drama, and people got angry at each other, and things like that. So in this part of the story, it was like more had these religious overtones, and it was all about, I don't know. There's a couple of PowerPoint slides like somewhere on the internet from an early artist's work on the game that described this early story. There was like some guy named Thomas, but that was scrapped pretty early on in favor of the more philosophical story, but not before. They made some really sexy siren art, I guess, and put it in the game. It's also nice. A couple of other places they have the other place where the siren imagery comes up that I know of also has this ambiguity where different perspectives you can seem like an ordinary girl, or angelic, or like an angelic savior, or an evil siren. Here, where one might first see the statue, she just looks like a bathing maiden, and the talons are not evident, and her hair, of course, looks short. But then over from the other perspectives, we can see that she's a sort of siren or harpy or etc. Oh, there's even a second band of hair. Look at that. So we can even line up. She can have medium length hair, but then her full, beautiful Rapunzel-esque self is in the ocean. Anyway, so bit of a lost. Ironic that sirens call out to lost sailors, but she herself is sort of lost in the context of the game. But she fits in well because there's so many little playful things in the Witness. Like these two strange roots are in the shape of koi fish, so you can see the koi right there, playing in the water. There's a few other oddities. There's this very weird tree which bothered me for so long, yeah, this tree has this crazy drooping over arm right here. I'm not sure if this is intended to just be a funny thing, or if it was once a relic of an environmental puzzle. But there's a certain perspective from which you can see the tree. I'll have to see it. It's something like. Well, I'm not sure. Maybe this won't work out. But there's some perspective in which the tree casts a kind of nice outline that maybe looks like a fish or a koi or something. Try to go down here, just catch it. Oh, there's one more thing on the symmetry area before we move on, which is, it's about as good as it gets, I guess. There's some perspective that works. One more thing we're talking about. Up here, again, after players have tuned into this hidden path here and been so surprised by it, the game pulls the exact same trick again. You're so excited by this laser, but there's this easy to myth path right over here, which leads to this beautiful, reposed, relaxed area and a charming little audio log. Listen to it.
One nature, perfect and pervading, circulates in all natures. One reality, all-comprehensive, contains within itself all realities. The one moon reflects itself wherever there is a sheet of water, and all the moons and the waters are embraced within the one moon. The absolute of all the Buddhas enters into my own being, and my own being is found in union with theirs. The inner light is beyond praise and blame. Like space, it knows no boundaries. Yet it is even here, within us, ever retaining its serenity and fullness. It is only when you hunt for it that you lose it. You cannot take hold of it, but equally you cannot get rid of it. And while you can do neither, it goes on, its own way. You remain silent, and it speaks. You speak, and it is dumb. The great gate of charity is wide open, with no obstacles before it. Young Cha Tashi, circa 700.
So I don't have any special comment about that, except to notice that there's sort of a joke moon here, and a joke reflected moon. I think its placement here is primarily doesn't have, except that it talks about reflections, but that's sort of a joke placement rather than a deep connection. I think it's primarily just because this location is so lovely. You're shaded by this wonderful tree, and you have this wide open view of the sea and the sky. The quote itself is, I suppose, kind of a bit of an instruction manual or a primer about just some of the tricky and some of the paradoxical ways that awareness, that mindfulness can entail, some of the paradoxical things that mindfulness can entail, and there is, for people out there who think this is just religious gibberish. I'm no guru, and I'm not good at expressing myself correctly, as you're seeing in this real-time Let's Play. But this stuff is real. I mean, when you're trying to look hard, you know, for that, if you're like explicitly trying to go for some Zen moment or some serene, subtle experience, then it will get away from you. And it's even though consciousness, as Cusa is saying, is everywhere and it's all around us and it's the only thing we know, it's so easily forgotten in a funny sense. And I'm not even sure what that means. Like, when we forget our awareness, are we literally becoming unconscious? Are we just running on autopilot like zombies? Or is there just a lack of awareness of, there's a lack of kind of metacognition or attention, but it's very subtle and paradoxical. All these doctrines, these Buddhist doctrines, for instance, they're telling you to seek something out, but you're seeking out something that's already there. So I don't know if that paradox has any particular resonance with the Symmetry area, but this is a beautiful part of the map, so I think it's a good place for the quote. It's also in support, you know, many people watching this might have also seen the Electron Dance video called The Unbearable Now, an interpretation of the witness, which is an excellent video that I like a lot. And this is one of the many places where you see that kind of koan idea of paradox and truth searching, which I agree is totally a core theme of the witness, although I think that the video's emphasis on that as the sole central meaning of the witness has led people to ignore all of the other concrete things that the witness really is saying, like about symmetry and geometry and hierarchy and, you know, scientific process, things like that. Alright, so that's pretty much it for this area. Next up, we're going to be talking about the desert area, which is very related. It's almost like a sequel to this area, but that'll come later. Last thing I want to do in this episode is just disprove the haters who believe in some kind of crazy conspiracy theory of the glasses, the bases, and fill in the environmental puzzle from this the third environmental puzzle in this zone, which is a funny one because the ones that apply to this kiln are so immediate. They're not exactly immediate, as you saw. I had to navigate to different parts of the island, but they're so striking. Versus some of these environmental puzzles, just like we saw with the panel puzzles, some of them are super syntactical. These ones up here, they're just all about the logic. Others are blurring the line a little bit more between the panel and the world, and between the panel puzzles and the environmental puzzles. So too, some of the environmental puzzles are just all about direct perception, and that's all there is to it. Versus others are a little trickier, and they do require some analytical thought or some trial and error. Sneak around here. This is always a thing in video games. It's always fun to get on the roof. Never makes a lick of sense, but you know, they built a roof, so just let me get on it. This is, of course, continuing the symmetry. There's fire escape on both sides, or whatever this building is. Here's a funny little mystery. Isolated panel with a weird symbol that seems to be correct no matter what kind of line we draw. This is part of an interesting experiment, similar to when I was describing that initial vault and the witness making that interesting design decision to confront players with the difficulty of that vault and all these symbols that they don't understand. This is a bit of an experiment. Usually the puzzles and the witness are laid out in this wonderful order for teaching people. This is a bit of a special challenge extra. There are a number of these puzzles with these little Dorito triangles, people inevitably call them, all over the island, but they're totally out of order. They're scattered just like this in the hidden places of the world, and it's incorrect to say that you don't get enough of them to practice, but like this one is totally useless. It's useless scientifically. because no matter what line you draw, you will always be approved. And so clearly this symbol means something, but it's impossible for us to figure out what it means based on just this this puzzle. So this is sort of a deliberately troll puzzle, in order that throws players for a loop by saying, hey, here's something you can't figure out, and if you want to understand what the symbol means, you're gonna really seriously have to take the initiative, go to these different islands, formally start making hypotheses and testing them, because the data is not so easy to come by when you're always right or always wrong. So it's an interesting one. Over here, you can see a little environmental puzzle right here. We got that circular shape, that line right up there, but we just can't quite get it to line up. So this is interesting because many of the environmental puzzles are immediate, but some of them, like this, are very game mechanics that you have to move something or get conditions to be just right before they work. So in this case, rather than raising and lowering any vase, there is actually a favored interpretation. We've got to raise vase number 0 in order to get it high off the ground. There we go, it's up there. Number 3 in the bank. So that's our symmetry area. It's beautiful. It's got a lot of complexity to it, even though it's easy. And it's a wonderful introduction to the world of the witness, both its themes and also its commitment to themes, and just how thoroughly everything in the game reinforces the ideas that it's trying to communicate. So pretty soon we'll be headed over to that desert land over there for a more complex elaboration on these ideas of symmetry and reflection. But for now, thanks for watching. So I'll see you later.